Good morning, everyone. Missing a couple. Probably just get started. Well, now it's 9:01. All right, that's late enough. Um, Welcome. Good morning. Good to see y'all. Yeah, today we're going to talk about caching. There's like a number of strategies with caching. So we're going to kind of talk about it high level and then discuss some of the different forms of caching that Rails offers. And yeah, we're gonna kind of start off with thinking about some caching that you've done already, or maybe use of the cache. Um, and yeah, and let's. I want you all to like have a chance to like think through this. So let's take like 5 minutes and we'll do these prompts. What's caching? What's memoization? What's the difference? And if you don't have like great answers, I say like go like maybe like see if you can find something. But if you've got an idea, it's okay to kind of like put it out there and then maybe not be quite right. But the answers are kind of like here in this click to expand part. But I'd love for you to think through it first. So let's take 5. We'll stay in here and yeah, go ahead and answer these in your notebook or in in a doc. If you all have like different answers that you want to put in your live notes doc, that'd be cool too. So you can kind of pool them. But yeah, we'll start from there. We'll come back at '07. Appreciate that. All right. So I'd love to hear from a few of you. Um, yeah, Catherine, what did you come up with for any of these bullet points?
Yeah. So caching helps your program run faster by storing data. Um, and then memoization uses caching to also speed up your program. That's the big picture, I
I
think.
like it. Yeah, I like it. Um, all things true. Cool. James, what did you come up with?
Yeah, so caching is just like readily available memory. So it's faster to access than like the hard drive of whatever server you're looking at. And then memorization is the specific return of like if you have specific inputs, it's the return that you would get from it. If it's the same, it'll cache that result so you can call on it at the same time and it won't have to rerun the method. And the difference is memorization is caching, but caching is not always memorization, because caching is more of a general term for just like upfront storage, I guess.
Yeah, great. I, all of that also sounding good to me. Anyone have anything they want to add? Any questions about what James or Catherine just said? Yeah, go ahead, Sandra.
I think something that stuck out, not sure it's entirely true all the time for both, but that memoization disappears when the HTTP like response cycle ends. Like once uh, the request gets in and like the response is sent, then that memory is gone.
Totally. Yeah. So once we build that response, we don't have access to that memoized piece of data. And so that's a great indicator of the difference. Where caching, we would have, if we did it correctly, we would have it for like the next request. And that's a great thing to bring up about caching is like the first request with caching, it's expensive still. You don't see any performance benefits. Nothing is different. Like it has to go hit the database, it has to go hit the API, whatever it is. But after that first time where we've done the expensive operation, now if we're using a cache and it happens to our request comes in and it happens to match a previous operation that we've done or a previous request that we've completed, now we can use the cache, which is a stored data. Could be stored a number of places depending on how you configure it, but we can use that stored data so we can circumvent that entire process of hitting an API, relying on an external server or traveling all the way to our database and back, we can kind of like speed up our application by avoiding those expensive lookups the second time. Cool. Yeah, and if we think of like current user, right? Like if we think about like how we set that up with the memoization there, now that is how we want to do that, because we want to basically have access to our current user that we find once in the database throughout the entire process of the request. But once that request is completed, basically like the next time we're coming through, we want to use our session to make sure, hey, is this current user like the who we think they are? Okay, great. Like let's allow them access to this page. So in this authentication authorization process, we want to use memoization, but we can't really use caching in the typical sense of how we would, because we still need to do the authentication process, and we still need to like check authorize every time through, like, hey, is this person who they say they are? So there is a way to kind of like still use some caching in that process, and that's a little advanced, but we're not going to get to that today. But just know like there's a type of caching that you can do that with. Cool. So yeah, I want to expand this. If you've already got it expanded, that's totally fine. And the one thing that I want to like hit on is like, I think that this like phone number lookup is kind of like a good analogy of like thinking about caching at a high level. So if we think about like caching is storing the data, memoization is caching the return value of a function for a limited amount of time. Like if we think about this giant phone book, like caching is a way for you to add, your favorite people in a smaller address book, right? So you're storing the data somewhere else, because this process of looking it up in the phone book, super complex. So you cache it in a smaller phone book. Now, at some point, someone might update their phone number and your cache is now invalidated and it doesn't work the same way, but that's okay. It's for the most part, it's going to be quite it's going to speed up your process of looking up friends' phone numbers, right? And then if we think about like memoization, it's like this idea of having tabs, right? Like we can have a tab each time to skip to like everyone that has T or S, but the looking up of that data from the cache is going to be like what memoization is. So slightly different. I think the analogy is helpful for me. Anyone have any other like analogies that are coming up for you that you want to use, or you have used in the past to think about these two things? All right, we'll stick with the phone book then. Cool. So yeah, let's do some breakout groups. And yeah, I want you to think about like, hey, what's the benefit of both caching and memoization in these applications we've been making? And then how can these help in your consultancy project, right? Like, let's talk about this for, I don't know, probably like 5 minutes, and then we'll come back and discuss. I'm gonna create these with, I think, 3 in each room. Yeah. Cool. Some of you have 2, some of you have 3, but I'm gonna open them up now, and yeah. All right, looks like we've got everyone back. So yeah, I'd love to hear from a few groups what you thought about, what you talked about. Yeah, go ahead, Alex.
Our project has a second layer of OAuth, that's pretty involved to like go off and through a utility and pull their bills. And the thought was that we might be able to create like a 15-day or 30-day token with the cache that's like, hey, don't go through all of that painful process again, because you don't just have new bills uploaded every day. Like, just if it hasn't been at least like 2 weeks, don't even go hit all of that. Just return the last set.
I like it. Cool. Yeah, I think there's like a couple of ways you could accomplish that. Like one is caching, and then another would be like kind of like setting a cookie on their browser that you like gave an expiration date, and you're like, hey, like let's just go. If this cookie's there and like it matches the user that we expect, then like just use maybe some cache data that is the bill data instead
Would
of.
that work if they came in from a different browser or like from their phone instead of their laptop though?
No. Yeah, if you had a different browser, then that cookie would not do what it's supposed to do. So you get to see like these kind of like scenarios where it's like, it works most of the time, and that's kind of like a common thread, I feel like, in software engineering. And so generally using like a combination of approaches here is going to be your best bet. And you know what else you could do is like you could use the user ID as your named cache, like for the bills, right, in your view. And you could say like, okay, let's if this named cache matches this user ID, like then guess what we can do? Like we're kind of using a combination of current user and a cache to like make sure like things match, and then get the bills that we need for them. Or if not, if that doesn't match, now we've got to go through this other process. Cool. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Any other discussion that came up? Yeah, Adam, go ahead.
Yeah, we might not go this route at all, but we're trying to think of examples in our projects. We thought of, in one part of our project in Chess Quest, you'll be playing a game, and we were just thinking about edge cases. What if someone like accidentally closes their browser mid-game, stuff like that. We have like a current board state that, in our model for a game, but it'd be annoying every move to maybe go back and save that to the back end. Or maybe someone closes their browser and it didn't have time to save it. There's all these edge cases where maybe caching can be used where it just like saves a snapshot of the game. And then like, oh, the browser quit, go and save it to the model. We talked through some of those.
Yeah, I like it. I think that would be those are interesting edge cases for sure, where it's kind of like you would basically want to invalidate the cache on every move, but for the edge case of where the browser is closed or whatever happens, maybe like power goes out, whatever it is, it's like, okay, for those edge cases, let's have a cache available just in case. And because we expect the cache to invalidate every request based on the way we name it with our key, and like it having a new move will invalidate the cache. Great. That's not always going to be the case, right? So I like that, the way that you're thinking there. Cool. Yeah. Anything else come up? I'd love to hear from someone in the Go Local group about what y'all were thinking about in terms of your project. Yeah, go ahead, Gus.
I was thinking about like for ours, we have, you go to your dashboard and you can see like the travel experiences that like you as a user have created. And I'd love to figure out a way to like cache that list. So it's not like every time you go to the dashboard page ever, it's going to make that API call to the backend to get those. And I was thinking like, yeah, just thinking through like if there was a way to sort of have like a trigger, like if certain actions happen, like if you visit the new excursion or like update excursion page, then like the next time you visit the dashboard, it would want to make that call. But if you don't hit those pages, like that information won't have changed. But I don't know, like I think I've looked a little bit into like how like the front end would cache information and like how you would store information on a page, but like how do you prevent it from like getting information from a separate application when like the updated, like knowing whether or not that information has been updated is like not really stored in the application that you're working in. So I think there's some things to work through, but like definitely to try to reduce some of the calls we're making to the back end just to like render a list of things that we made would be helpful.
Totally. Yeah. And I think like the way that you're thinking about it is good because right, like there's we're not dealing with a monolith, right? You've got multiple applications that are talking with one another, and you might need to use caching not just in one of them as a strategy, but in multiple parts of the application so that when the request response cycle happens in one, maybe there's a cache on the back end level that the front end can hit and say like, oh, yep, I'm using the cache in the back end. Front end doesn't have to actually know that, but it could be using it. Similarly, from the back end, like when it's hitting the microservice, like maybe there's a way to cache the API call there where the back end doesn't have to know that it's cached, but the microservice does need to know that. So things to think through. Cool. I think, yeah, let's take a break. Let's take 5 and then we'll come back. I'm going to like show you some stuff in our, what is this repo even called? Mock tracker that I just like set up some basic caching, and I'm going to walk through like what I did to do that, and then walk through how to like see your cache and pry is really the way that what I want y'all to take away from it. And we'll talk through a scenario that I created, and then yeah, we'll leave the rest of the time for you all to kind of like go and see if you can implement this in a meaningful way. Okay, let's come back at 32. All right, I'm gonna share. Okay, so there's like a couple of things to like be aware of. Let me get set up real quick. Cool. And okay, cool. So let's see if I can just put this next to probably this. All right, so a couple of things that I've already done that I'm just going to run through again. So let me stop this server. So by default in development mode, the cache is turned off in Rails. So something to be aware of there, you've got to turn it on. And so the way that you can do that is, this is in the docs that are linked in the lesson plan. And it's, if you're looking for this command, you can't remember it. It's pretty small. So maybe like, maybe remember it. I don't know. I don't remember any commands really. But if you want to look up the command, it's at the bottom of the Rails guides for caching, right? It basically says like, hey, development mode turned off by default. This is how you turn it on. So right now mine is on. So if I run this, it's kind of like a toggle. If we think about it from yesterday, development mode is no longer being cached. And then if I run it again, now it is being cached. So you can toggle it on and off how you need it. That's really nice. Thanks, Rails. Cool. So it's on. Let's run this server. I'm on mock tracker, and like I realized this morning that there were like quite a few different versions, and none of them were really working that great. So I just kind of set up a simple like, I built off of Ian's refactored service, and I'll kind of like walk you through where I'm getting some things from. So let's bring up the government controller. Okay, so basically I get my member search from my form, goes through the facade, goes through the service, but eventually I get a found member back, and a found member is simply a PORO. So let's bring that up. Ba, ba, ba. Yeah. All right, and so yeah, what I get back is a simple PORO, which is an instance of this class I created member. It's got a name and a Twitter handle. That's it. All right, so this is all I'm getting back is a simple instance member, and then I'm passing that over here to my view, and I'm saying like, hey, like cache this found member, and this is like probably some new syntax if you haven't done caching. I'm giving cache an argument here, and then I'm wrapping what I want to cache in a block. All right, and so this is like what we'd call view fragment caching, because I'm caching a specific part of the view. Now I don't have anything else, so like if I wanted to make something else, I could say this. Now this part of the view is not going to be cached. All right, so like the do end is everything that's cached, and so this is a fragment of the view that I'm deciding to cache based on, you know, this found member. All right, any questions so far? Okay, cool. So let's get rid of that. And yeah, let's think. All right, so I've got my server running. Great. I think I've got a prize somewhere. Yeah, all right, I put it here. Let's put it outside of the block just to make it not confusing that it's inside the block. And this will be hit on a subsequent request. So I'm doing the senator from Hawaii here, and I'm gonna hit her again. Okay. Hirono, great. If I look at my server, cool, I hit my pry. I don't really care about anything right now. Actually, let's take a look at this. Let's see. This is kind of like the way that I'm going to be able to look at my cache at any point. So this is super helpful in pry. Yeah, I'd take a look at this. Can y'all see this okay? Let me. So it's rails.cache is kind of how I can like get into the cache. This will kind of return the cache object though. It'll tell me like, hey, it's in this like memory store and like it's part of active support. Great, but that's not that helpful, right? I can't really see anything. So if I want to like see what data the cache has, now I do an instance variable get, I pass it data, and I can see like, okay, like here's what is actually living in the cache. And it kind of looks like a nice hash value. And then I get to see the name of my cache here, which is interesting. And that points at some more parts of this hash, just like, hey, you've got this created at value, you've got this expires in, you've got the actual value that was cache. Like, what am I actually storing in the cache is here, and yeah, the version, which in this part is blank. So great, I get this cache, and I'm like, hey, this looks like it's working. This is cool. So now I exit. Okay, let's go back to my view. All right, great. It rendered this view just fine. Pretty simple view. So now what I would hope to happen here on this second try is that I go to fetch this request, and I fetch the cached view, right? Because I've set this in the cache. I did my expensive operation first. Now I want to see this in action, right? I want to see this happen, and I want to see myself use this cache that I've set. So if we go back to our form and we do Hirono again, and we search, great. I'm going to hit this pry. Let's check out my cache. Interesting. Now I've got two entries for the same thing. So I've duplicated my cache, which tells me what? Go ahead, Gus.
That you're not looking in the cache for that information before you make the request. Like you're just going to make the request and throwing it in the cache. You're not actually going in to get it.
Yeah, so I like where your head's at there. The thing about this method is when I cache this in the block like this, it basically will do like, it's doing a read and a write. kind of like all in one. So it's like, hey, does this exist? If yes, let's use it. If no, let's write it to the cache. So it is kind of doing both of those things under the hood, but I like where your head's at there. I think Sydney had your hand up.
Yeah, I was going to just say, like, is this where you maybe lean more on memoization since it involves like returning the value of a function based on parameters?
Not quite on this one. Like I do
Okay.
want to cache the actual view here. I do want to like cache it based on, you know, this specific member, because the specific member is kind of the whole thing. Like if I search for the same member, I want to use like over 2 different requests, right? 2 different searches, then I want to use the cache if I have one for a specific member.
Okay.
Cool. Any other thoughts? And the one thing that I'll remind you of is that this is a PORO here. And maybe it's a slightly abstracted away, actually, now that I look at the code. Trick question, you can't see anything. Okay. So what's happening in this facade? Let's just assume the service returns the data correctly here. Great. Then we iterate over the members and say like, hey, once we get a match here, give me this member. Go ahead, Robert.
So do we need to delete the object that we've created then, so we don't duplicate those objects?
I like what you're thinking about here. I don't think we want to delete the object necessarily, but yeah, this idea of duplicating the object is interesting. Anyone want to build on that, or Robert, is that leading you in any direction?
Should do you then need to? Should you, I guess, clear the cache, or can you somehow delete what's in the cache that you've already put in before, so that you don't continue to just put the same thing in over and over again?
I like where you're thinking there. We definitely don't want to put the same thing over and over again. Yes, there is a way to clear the cache, but it's not going to solve our problem for this specific issue where we're having duplicate cache entries each time we run this request. James, what do you think?
Yeah, so this would be a good use case for memoization. So in the controller, you do the, found member, and then you'd memorize government facade. So then you take the cache out of the view, and now it's caching in the controller.
I like that as like a way to do it, but it wouldn't work with memoization because after the request or the response was built, we lose that memoization. So we couldn't quite use it, but I like what you're thinking of, like maybe we just cache this with something outside of the view, which would be like, this gets into low level caching, which y'all are gonna have some time to work through. I'm gonna tell you what's happening here because it's kind of it's a little tricky. So when I'm doing this cache, the way that I've set my my cache key, which is basically you set your cache key with the argument of the cache. The way that I've done that, I'm always going to have a different instance of member, right? Because with each request and response, it doesn't matter if I'm finding the same senator, I'm still creating a new instance of my member class, right? So I'm still, so, and remember, like you can see these objects here, these object members as like part of my, my keys. And that in turn, you can see these two entries here. These are the same, right? Like these two keys, these are the same. What's different is the member object, right? So how could I, instead of using the member object, use something that will be the same every single time I do this cache? Yeah, go ahead, Robert.
What about like a dot last or something like that?
Yeah, okay, I like where your head's at. So I don't necessarily want to use a dot last here because found member is an object, but I do have a couple of specific attributes that I could use in my cache. So I'm going to use dot name because if I cache on the name and not the actual object, now the name key will be the same every time through. All right, and so I have to, so I'm gonna run through this so that we can see it. So how do I clear the cache? Come on. There we go. All right, simple rails.cache.clear. Anytime you want to clear it, you're like, you know what, we made some changes, we want to see something different. Clear, cool. Now if I check what the data is, empty hash. All right, that's how you can kind of like double check. Okay, is it cleared? Yes, it is. Now let's exit. Let's run through this one more time. Get the senator from Hawaii here. And let's search. Great, I should hit this pry again. I do. Let's see what the cache is. Okay, now I see we've got a key here and then we've got the name. So this looks promising. Cool. Now if I exit, now I've got something in the cache. So I've done my expensive work and I want to come back, and I'm hoping now that the next time I do this search, my cache response is used. All right, so let's see. Let's go back to the form. Let's do Hirono. Cool. Now in theory, we should only have one cached entry here, right? And indeed, now we only have one. Second request, still only one, because the key matches, right? This time the key matched, and this time it's saying, hey, I'm not writing a new cache, I'm reading an old cache, all right? And so that's the beauty of like what Gus and I were talking about, which is this cache do block here, this is gonna do both reading and writing. First time it writes, second time it reads, as long as the keys match, all right? That's the key. No pun intended. And cool. So now, if I exit, great. Harder to tell. It's kind of hard to tell with this pry in there, I think. I think sometimes it'll tell you it's a cache read right here from the server. But this actually used my cache this second time through. All right. So let's see if I can see that. If I got rid of my pry, let's try it one more time. Hirono. Cool. And does it tell me anything about caching in here? Not quite. So when it will tell you is when you have a database call. If you do some low-level caching and you hit the database and go and like sometimes you can see your SQL command in here, like showing up in the server. If you're using a cache on that, a lot of times it'll show you, like instead of showing like, oh, I went to the database, ran this SQL, return these objects, it'll be like, no. I use the cache for this, and that will show up here in the server. Doesn't look like it's going to show up for the views, but we can check that by seeing it. Like, did our cache duplicate or not? And that's kind of like a good way of like figuring out like, okay, is it using this same cache or not? I'm not sure if this will store it over an application. No, so it's too simple to store right here in the application, the dev tools. However, if your cache is larger and you're caching more than just a fragmented cache of the view, you can come here in the application tab of DevTools and see what is stored over here on the browser side. All right, somewhere else to look. Okay, took a little bit more time than I wanted to. Let's say this. Let's give you all 20 minutes to basically go and try and implement this. I would say like project is probably best, but I don't necessarily want you to work in your project teams. I want you to like check out a branch, whoever kind of like has something up in your breakout group that can work, and one person drive, one person two people navigate, and see if you can implement some of this view fragment caching, and then see if you can like look at the docs of how low level caching is working and cache either a database operation or an API call. Any questions on what I'm asking y'all to do? I think the project is probably lowest lift as far as like getting acquainted with, you know, the directory and spending time there. Okay, I'm going to open these and we'll come back in 20 and see what we came up with. I'll also bounce around, and if y'all have questions, feel free to ask.
Makes me so nervous. No.
Hey, y'all.
Hi, Tim.
Hi.
One question I had with this. So when you added the dot name at the end, what was it that actually changed?
Yeah, so the big thing that changed, if I share, let's see if I can get back to that. Okay, so if you look at like when I run this in Pry, so let's look at where I was. I was kind of like after the cache block, and I ran a rails.cache.instance variable get data. So that'll show me like the data of this cache. This key is what really changed. So Rails will kind of like put its own like special key on it, and then I will tell it like, hey, this is how it's also unique to my part of the application and that is what I told it right here. When I fed it this dot name, you can see this dot name like got added to the end of the key. Whereas before, if we kind of run up, it was this member object, which was different each time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yep. Yeah, good question there. Anything else?
So that's just helpful in like naming our caches basically, so we can it's just for readability.
It's for like how it's for how that cache is actually going to be found or not based on what you name it, right? So you could do this based on an object ID, right? If we had an active record object in here, we'd probably use a different approach here because this is a PORO, right? We don't have the ID column, we don't have the updated app. And if you read through the docs a little bit, like there's a strategy, there's like a helper method you can use where it automatically will like set the key based on the ID of the active record object and the updated attribute. So that if either of those things, like obviously ID is probably not going to change, but if the updated at changes, it invalidates the cache. And it's like, nope, we got to go do the expensive operation to actually get what this object is currently.
Got it.
Cool.
No, can you say that again? I'm sorry, I just confused myself.
That's okay.
So you're saying, no, do you mind just one more time? I'm sorry.
Absolutely. All right, and I'm going to bring this over. Where is this part in the guides? Yeah, so this is the low level example of doing it. Let's look back at a different example. Okay, so basically like the idea is if these, let's assume these are like active record objects, all right, and not POROs, like I can give it just the object and it'll kind of like work nicely and like under the hood. Under the hood, what it does is like it sets this key based on that specific object's ID and updated at columns. And so now if those things have changed when it comes back and like sees the cache, then it will go and like fetch that actual object because it will see like in the cache key, which is here, it will see in the cache key like, hey, something about this has changed. So these do not match up. So I cannot use the cache. I need to go and find
Okay.
the most recent change, or the most current version of the object.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that helpful?
Yeah. I don't know why I was thinking that, because you were saying originally that like once you store it, it's like, and then if something changes, it's obsolete. And this is to basically override that process, right? So like we're refreshing the data that's in our cache.
Yeah, exactly. So
Okay.
you're basically saying like, hey, this old cache is invalidated dynamically based on the object's updated attribute, so that you can
Okay.
like always have the most recent version. And this is like a common approach that Rails uses. You used to have to like in one of the previous lesson plans, like you had to like basically set this key like yourself. Now what you can do is you can do something like, if this happens to be an active record object, you just feed it the object and it does it automatically based on the ID and the updated at value. Whereas previous versions of Rails, we had to like, that was like the common approach of like, hey, call, set the key as like the updated at value and the ID. And now it just kind of does it automatically for you in newer versions in 5 and 6.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. All right.
right.
I'm gonna let y'all get to it unless more questions.
No, I don't have any, sorry.
Thanks, Tim.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Haven't implemented anything, but we've been talking about it.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I think like the good thing about the syntax is it's pretty simple, and like you can kind of like try a couple of different things to like see like, is this working? Like what do I see here? And like kind of go through that process and pry to like check and see what's in the cache. So yeah, I don't mind if y'all are kind of like talking about the best use cases. Like here, I'll name some. It's like expensive API operations, right? Like going and hitting an external API, like great.
They cost $3 a hit like ours does.
Low level cache that, expire it never, I would say, for y'all's application.
Can you actually, so we were talking about that. So I know you can set it like to expire in 30 days.
Mhm.
Can I set it to expire on like the first day of the month or the 15th day of the month?
Yeah, that would be like slightly harder, but you could do like a expires like 1.month from now beginning of month. So like you could do like something like that to where it's like whatever month it is, it expires in a month and then beginning of the month, or you could be like beginning of the month plus 15 if you wanted on the 15th. So there's like some ways that you could, implement that.
Rails magic.
No, man, building Sinatra frameworks makes you like actually understand and miss Rails magic. That's what it took me 24 hours to realize, like, I didn't know I loved Rails, but I fucking love Rails.
Are there any other languages that do the like 5 days from now syntax or whatever? I feel like that's like
Really nice.
Python.
It's actually like a Ruby thing, because that's like comes in from the date time or date class basically. And yeah, it's great syntax, but I don't know if there's other languages that do, because dates are just notoriously hard. So that's like a really nice API.
Oh, there's a cool one I learned the other day.
Oh, Tim, we've got a random question for you after beating our head against the code challenge this morning. When is Turing going to start teaching a language that isn't dying? Like, when is it going to switch to Python? How much of a lift is, I mean, it's going to be a huge lift, but damn, it sure would be nice.
Yeah, there's like so many variables that to consider with that question. And like what I'll tell you is like we have been considering it for about the last like 6 months, maybe a little bit longer. And everyone has an opinion, and some opinions say we have such a great relationship with Rails shops that we risk like losing those employer relationships. Some people say like, well, doesn't matter, because if all the jobs are going to be gone soon, then we need to be like using a more like something like Python that's like more popular and growing. So you've got arguments on both sides. I'll tell you that my personal view is that the backend program should be language agnostic. And yes, it will be like a long, hard road to like getting it there. Yet it's worth undertaking, because I don't care what language you build an application in, as long as like you understand the high level principles. And realistically, that's what's more important than.
And that's what a lot of college programs are, right? Like they don't teach you Ruby or they teach you Python, they teach you OOP, or they teach you functional programming.
Yeah. And it's just hard to like teach those things without also choosing a tool to implement them, right? Like you still have to choose a tool. So my like thinking is, it might be better to just like have a ton of like mod 1 like exercises in a ton of different languages, and like let you decide how you want to implement a challenge. Like great, then we get to mod 2 and it's like, okay, like here are the 3 or 4 frameworks that are like pretty popular, and like you can build your application in any of them. It doesn't matter to us. That'd
be really cool.
Would be ideal.
That would be really, really hard. Like mod 1 would be even harder, which is difficult to imagine, but it would be cool.
Yeah.
Do the Ruby exercises, or the whatever exercises.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of like how I think of it, is like you choose your own adventure of like what path, and then hopefully by mod 3 you could like switch paths, like not without that much lift.
That being said, what should I learn? I've heard JavaScript.
You can't avoid JavaScript. Unavoidable.
Yeah.
People keep telling me that, but goddamn, I'm trying my best.
They're like, oh, you want a job? Go learn JavaScript.
You can't avoid JavaScript, so I say like probably should have done the front end program. Just kidding.
That's kind of what I'm thinking. I haven't really that.
No, I'm messing around. I think like JavaScript's gonna serve you best as a web developer immediately, because anytime you have to go to the front end, like just understanding what's going on over there,
just being able to read the ugly fucking language.
Exactly. All right, I'm getting help. Ask for help from another room. I'm gonna bounce.
Cool. Thanks for the perspective.
Yep.
What's up, y'all?
We forgot how you called what you called in the read function in the terminal in order to understand like the key that we're defining.
Cool. So let's check out let's do rails.cache.instance variable get with underscores under it.
Cache.instance variables.
So just one, no S.
Variable.
Get. Underscore get.
Okay.
Yeah, we didn't do that part.
Pass it a symbol and then the instance variable. So at data.
Movie title.
Nah, so you got to pass it at data, because it doesn't.
Okay.
The movie.title will be like the key, the cache key.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah. So there you can see on the road is part of that key there.
Okay. Cool. Also, more of a side question. We had our cache end. Excuse me. Gonna sneeze. I probably won't sneeze. Cache end all the way at the excuse me, at the bottom here, and it wasn't picking up that the cache was actually the movie.title was being cached, but then we move it up here and it is there some sort of like gotcha?
Probably. To be honest, I'm not sure what it is though.
Okay.
What you can do is, instead of caching this fragment, you could do this cache in the controller. So you could call a render show.html.erb and then pass it the option of cache true in this controller action, and that will cache the entire page instead of a fragment of the page.
Oh, can you say that a bit slower?
Yeah, there's an example in the Rails guides. So what you can do is, if we go to the show action here, yeah, you've got this at movie. You could say render, and then like as the last line of this, you could say like render, and then I can't remember what you need to call it, the first argument, but I think it's like show.html.erb. So you Yeah, but you need render as the first thing on that line.
Okay.
It's basically you're using this render helper to, and I don't know exactly the syntax. You might have to look it up, but then a comma and then cache true. And then that's symbol true, yeah. And then now you're essentially saying like, I don't want to cache like a specific part of this page, like based on, you know, whatever the name is. I'm saying like, I want to cache this entire page until it changes.
That makes sense. Do we have to take the cache part out of the view, or do we leave that there? So it would still cache on the title.
I'm not sure how they work in conjunction, to be honest. I think you'd have to play around with that a little bit to see like which is which, but I know that they could work in conjunction. So you can be like, I want to cache this whole page, and I want to cache these like specific objects that are kind of like coming through here. And I'm not exactly sure like what that looks like after that, but I would assume that you have two separate cache stores, one based on the objects and one based on like, is this page changed? And probably the one of the page will likely like override the fragment caching, because it will basically be looked at first, right? We'll look at the page key and it'll be like, here's the cache. So then it won't even get to the cache that's like fragmented within the view. That's my guess, but it could work slightly different. But I mean,
yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, and I looked too. It looks like if you have a collection of stuff, you can call, if you're trying to render the partial for each one, you could call cache true there, and so it would cache the individual like partial pages.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just curious, what's the difference between like the instance variable get and like a dot fetch? Is that like
it's
specific?
No, I think it was the first. It was just like, well, dot fetch is like how you do low level catching in your like model or in your service, like whatever. If you wanted to like cache the actual API call or the SQL command, then you would use a rails.fetch and pass it like a couple of parameters. That's in the docs too. But the way that I was doing it, I'm just looking at the entire cache store and like just looking at all the cache stores that are in it with doing that instance variable get. And that's just like that was the first like method I found to look at it. I'm sure there's probably another way to do it too.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah. All right, I've got a little bit more help being asked from Max, so I'm gonna bounce, but hopefully this was helpful.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Like, am I even on top? Do I understand anything that's happening?
Yes, you do.
Hey, Tim.
Thank you, Tim. Let's see. I'll reshare because I don't know if I'm still sharing, but we're stuck.
Okay.
We decided to work on mock tracker since we're all in different projects.
That's cool.
Can we all see this?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, this is the problem I was running into earlier that I had to fix. It's the repo's broken, so it's not y'all's fault.
Okay, that's good.
This is like, where is this coming in? So data is not coming in because of if we look at this, this is the facade. If you go to the facade, so you need this. Ian was showing you that you can like set an environment variable here, environment Congress number, but you don't have that set in your environment like he did, but you don't. So if you hard code that to be a string of 116, then you'll get past that issue. That. Yep. And then the other thing I would do is name.capitalize over on the right of 14, line 14 in the facade. All the way over. Yeah, name.capitalize will get you where you want to be, because if it comes in lowercase, it doesn't match. Yeah, I like went and did all this stuff earlier this morning because I was like, why is everything broken in this repo? But that's why I kind of like didn't want to point y'all here, because I didn't want you to have to deal with this.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Fair. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
So Tim, on this, can we like comment out lines 8 and 15, and then this will work, just putting what we did in the controller?
Yeah, it'll work differently though. Basically what you're doing is in the controller, you're kind of like doing a low level cache, I don't know if it'll work. I'd have to check the syntax. You're doing a low-level cache in the controller, whereas in the view, what you would be doing is a fragment cache, and those would actually be working separately and like separate. Same idea of like using a stored value that like you don't have to go look up again, but one like caching a part of the view and one caching an operation that we don't want to have to go do again.
Got it.
I don't know if this will work in the controller, just because I haven't seen it done in the controller. The way that you would generally do the controller, like cache something in the controller, is like you'd want to use the render method explicitly. So like render search.html.erb in this like search action, and then pass it a parameter of cache true. And now that'll cache the entire page. But like maybe that's not what you want to do. Like maybe you want to like make sure that you're caching on something specific in the view, like like specific active record objects. So this is kind of like where it gets down to like, how do I want to cache things? Like, do I want to cache the entire view? Do I want to cache part of the view? I have options. I can do one in the controller, cache the entire, the entire page that's being rendered, or I can go in the view and say, I want to cache like a specific fragment of it.
And so then this cache in the controller, is that server side or is that still client side?
These are going to both be server side.
Okay.
Cool.
And how then would caching work client side?
Not sure. Not getting into it, but there's a way.
Great.
I honestly don't know. I truly don't know, and like haven't implemented it client side. This is like all like server side caching with Rails. So
Okay.
but there is a way, and like you basically use the browser's cache store. All right, I'm gonna close these. We went a little over, but hopefully this was helpful.
Yeah. Thanks, Tim.
Yeah.
It's fun.
Welcome back, y'all. All right, so we took a little longer than planned, but I was in some groups and y'all were having some good discussions and appreciate that. Anyone have questions that they want to follow up about? Anyone have something that they implemented that they want to show and aren't sure if it's working correctly, are sure if it's working correctly? How do you know? When I open it up to y'all. Yeah, go ahead, Isabel.
We didn't really get to implement it, but something we discovered is if you write the caching in the controller, that's how you like cache the entire page. Whereas like if you write it in the view, that's when you can kind of like do fragments, which I found a neat tidbit to know.
Yep, absolutely. And like you can cache an entire page in the view still if you just wrap the entire view in the cache block, but that's not necessarily like best practice, I guess. And I think actually Mike and Mike were or sorry, no, it was Mike and James that were sorry, James, that were like, it doesn't actually work if you do it this way. So I could have just what I said could be wrong. It's like something to play around with. But like, yeah, that's a good point. Is like if you want to cache the entire HTML, or there's a way to do it with like the entire JavaScript asset, then you can do that if you do a explicit render in the controller action and then pass it the parameter of cache true. Cool. Yeah, go ahead, Robert.
One of the things we ran into is that one of the projects, of course, is using there's a JavaScript script, and we were trying to put a pry and and the caching in the middle of the script. Is that something you can do with the embedded Ruby, or do you have to use the JavaScript version when you're inside of a JavaScript script?
Yeah, so pry is only going to work in an embedded Ruby file. If you're in a JavaScript file, you've got to use a different type of debugger. And I think that the way to do it is like, I think you just put the word debugger in it, and then that will pop you into a console session in your dev tools, which is slightly different than how it would work, obviously, in the server in pry. But yeah, that's a good thing to note. Like JavaScript's got its own debugger, and like you can either set a breakpoint like in the asset in the dev tools on the JavaScript asset, like there's a way to do it that way, or you put the word debugger and it should stop also. Cool. Okay. Yeah, I think like here's where I'd like you to be at. A better understanding of caching than you walked in with today, especially like within Rails. I don't expect you all to like have it implemented and like go. It's not going to take like a couple of hours to like toy around with. Like it is going to take that time, but something to stretch for on the project. And the caching can really, like, if you're building an app from scratch in Rails, like caching can basically like get you to a point where you don't have to worry about like a bunch of Heroku servers and a bunch of like extra AWS money. Like if you're using AWS to deploy, like caching can like take care of your performance problems up to like thousands of users, like thousands of concurrent users. So it's a really strong strategy for like saving money, saving your users time, and like building out the app. Yeah. Cool. All right, y'all. I think work time the rest of the day. Accountability buddy check in at 1, and then yeah, be on the lookout for the thread around 12:50 for attendance. All right, y'all. Yeah, save cash with cash. Love it. That's it. Have a good rest of the day.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.